Hey everyone, welcome back to Make It Happen Mondays, where we talk about sales, business, entrepreneurship, personal growth, mental health, and everything in between with guests who I truly respect and I think make a positive impact on the world around us. And this was just an awesome conversation that I just had with my now new friend, John Costigan. Now, John, for those of you who don't know him, John is one of the original gangsters when it comes to sales and sales training. You know, people call me and joke around about me being the Godfather sometimes, and I say always, all right, well, as long as it's Mitch from old school and not the actual Godfather, I'll accept it. But John is one of the true godfathers of sales. He's been doing this for much longer than I have and seen a lot more and has a really interesting perspective. So we covered the gamut on this. We went from tactics about the top-down approach and what's changed in sales. And then we got into more of the mentality of like the whole fake it till you make it mentality and how you can really be your authentic self. And then dove into the why, the values, the vision, and his purpose, because he's been through some real tough shit over the past couple of years. Got diagnosed with cancer, throat cancer, which for a trainer is pretty much the end of your career, and how he fought through it and the new perspective that he has on life and what are some of the lessons he learned going through that process. So like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I hope you do too. I hope it helps you get another perspective on things, a little bit of a different perspective than you might have had before this conversation. So hope you enjoy it. Let's make it happen.
What's happening, Make It Happen family? Big shout out to our partners today, Gong, Vidyard, and Chili Piper. Gong's data is more than valuable. It's cornerstone in any organization looking to collect the data that's going to tell them where they can improve and where they need to spend their time making changes. Vidyard makes it easy for people to use videos anywhere. No matter whether you're sending videos in email or on social media, posting them somewhere, or sending them in a DM, Vidyard has got you covered. Our friends at Chili Piper are so much fun to be around. They make it easy for people to get on your calendar. And every sales rep has got to have this function locked in. It's one of the most important things we can do as a seller. How can I get you on my calendar easily? Chili Piper can make that happen for you. Be sure that you're checking out all these great tools. And now let's pass it over to John to find out who's joining him today. See you soon, everybody.
All right, Mr. Costigan, man, I have been looking for this conversation for a long time. A lot of people call me the OG in the sales community, man, but I do not hold a candle to you, and I am excited to have this conversation. How you doing, John?
Good. You said a lot of people call you. I'm like, well, at least they call you.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Like they're like, oh yeah, you know, OG in sales or like the Godfather. Like I've gotten that a couple of times, like the Godfather. I'm like, well, as long as you're talking about like Mitchapalooza with like old school Godfather, I'm cool with that label, right? Yeah. But if you're talking about like Corleone over there, no, I refuse that label right there. But
I was about to say that second label is more of a hey, buy it or else.
Exactly.
Make an offer you can't refuse. That's right.
Yeah. So for those of my audience that don't know you, and I'd be shocked if the majority of them don't. But John, talk to me. Let's give the background of where you're coming from, because you've been in this game longer than I have. You've been grinding longer than I have, and then we're going to talk a little bit about your journey and mine along the way and what we've learned. But give us a little background of where you're coming from these days and who you are.
Yeah, you know, I've been a salesman my whole life, Johnny. My first job, actually, I lost my dad when I was young, like 9 years old, and I remember my older brother and sisters. I'm one of six. I'm number 5 in the food chain. And so I remember my first job ever after dad passed, I saw my brother and sisters kind of doing stuff to, you know, help the family financially. Mm-hmm. And I was like 9. And the first job I ever had was selling dirt out of a red wagon on the streets of Chicago. And I usually don't tell this story. Then people in the audience, they kind of look at me like, really? That's how you started selling? Yep. And I was like, yeah, you know, I had this idea where, you know, all the houses in the neighborhood in Chicago, and every house is right next to each other. And and I just started walking around, and I had this little red wagon with some black dirt and some grass seed. And I would just go find houses that you knew they had a dog. And I just go, hey, you got some yellow spots? You know, $5, I'll put some dirt, some grass seed down. And you know, and I joke, because I say, you know, back then, you know, who's going to say no to this face? You know, well, by the way, the cuteness went away a long time ago. Yeah, but right there so that was my first sales job, which to this day, I still remember the feelings of just rejection. Like knocking on doors, and even like a little old lady coming up and like turns around, walks away. And I'd be like, oh my God, how threatening can I be? I'm this 9-year-old, like Opie looking kid on your doorstep. Like I could be lost. Yeah. So, so the journey kind of started there. And then obviously we went to went to college playing pro basketball in Europe for a couple of years. And I came back and I said, well, let's do what every other ex-jock does. Let's go be a sales guy after I graduated college. And so, hopped around from job to job. And, and actually I went to work for a great company called Comdisco, which was a big financing disaster recovery firm. We would compete against like GE Credit, IBM Credit Corp. And we would finance, mostly mainframe, raised floor technology, IBM, stuff like that. And I said, I played golf with a guy who was making $1 million a year. And I'll never forget, I was playing golf with him, Tom Huber. And I'm like, how do you make $1 million a year being a salesperson? Mm-hmm. And so long story short, I got into the company, worked for them for a while. They moved me down to Atlanta. And then next thing I know, I got moved here through work. And I went to a training class. And I just remember calling my oldest brother, Mike, and just said, he's like, how'd class go? I go, Mike, I didn't think it was that great. I don't think it was a trainer. It'd be like taking golf lessons from somebody who never played golf. I said, so I didn't think it was that great. If he's so great, why is this guy not out there just crushing it? Because those who can do and those who can't teach. So he said, well, if you think you're so damn good, why don't you do it? And I said, Mike, I bet $100 I can do this. And he's like, all right, good. The bet's on. Click. And he hung up the phone. And I called him back and he didn't pick up. I'm like, well, shit, now I got to do it. Yeah. And so I kind of had this hokey idea, which actually I read in David Sandler's original book. David Sandler had written in there that he used to actually make live calls and he would show the company he was training. He'd have like a little recorder in a classroom, but David would call on his behalf. So David would make phone calls for training, not for the client. And I thought, how cool would this be to actually just one facet of training, just prospecting and cold calling. Because of course, throughout time I've evolved to do a lot more than that. But just that little part, I said, how cool would it be to call on your behalf? Like, okay, you give me your toughest prospect and I'll show you how this works. And that's what really kind of hit, John. That's what, boom, within 6 months, I was traveling all over the world and companies were paying me. I was in Vegas. It got nuts really fast because people want to see the show. I want to see this guy do it live in front of an audience. And that's how it kind of got to where it's today.
That risk factor, and we'll keep on going, but that risk factor, like that's always been something I've admired because I never had the cojones to do that, right? And I remember Steve Richard from Exec Vision. We were both doing a conference and I got up and I did my show or whatever. And, I tactical stuff, whatever. And look, I'm a practitioner. I'm right there with you. Like those who teach, I have a philosophy here at JV Sales where I don't hire trainers. I hire sales reps who then can train. Because if you are not day-to-day, hand-to-hand combat in this world right now, you're a dinosaur, right? So don't tell me something that you did 20 years ago that works because it's probably not working right now. But so my stuff was decent. And I thought it was, good reviews. And then Steve gets up and he does that. Like, he's like, all right, cool. So who's going to prospect? And I'm like, what are you doing right now? And he's like, all right, and of course, right? Like, so I'm sure you probably have a similar experience. Like some people are kind of sheepish and then all of a sudden somebody raises their hand and inevitably in this one, somebody was like, I got one. He's like, all right, great. Who is it? And it was like a branch of a bank in like middle of Minnesota type of thing. And I'm like, dude, worst case scenario right now, by the way. And so he goes and he's like going through the phone tree and it took like 10, 15, 20 minutes for him to even get to somebody live. And the whole time I'm like, dude, this is brutal. Yeah. So I got to ask with that approach, like how often did it, like percentage wise, just gut check on this. How often did that like work where you at least got to talk to somebody and show a little bit of it versus like it was a nightmare, even like going through a phone tree to not get anything?
So really good question. I learned really quickly that you mentioned that 10 to 15 minutes when you have an audience in front of you, they can get a little antsy and bored quick, and you have to keep it moving. So I remember when I first did it, my first few programs, if there's one thing I think, honestly, there's a lot of things I don't do well. The one thing I think that I'm okay at is reading my audience where I go, okay, you got to call an audible and move on because you're losing them. So when I would make my calls, I would have a list. I just yell to people and I put the names up really quick and I'd start calling. And I always started just give me the main. See, I can usually talk to somebody pretty quick because I wasn't like, you look at the org chart, everybody would give me, they'd give me this guy or this lady, like, okay, call this person. There's your president, your C-level, might be a manager underneath. And okay, here's ABC. And so they were all calling this person, never returned their calls. I always just went to the front desk and I went all the way to the CEO. So they would always pick up the phone saying ABC company.
Yeah.
And so that was like an 80 to 90% hit rate because they had someone at the front desk picking up the phone.
Okay.
And just that, though, they're like, oh my God, he's actually doing this.
Yeah.
And then I would always just say, hey, send me up to, and I always found out what the president's name was on the internet. Because when I'm doing this, I got the screens behind me. I'm like, okay, who's the company?
Yeah.
I'd type it in, president, and just ask for the president. Hey, send me to Michelle's office. Michelle Smith, your president, thanks. And about 80% of the time, I'd go. Just because I sounded like I probably belonged there. And I didn't do the pitch. I didn't go, hey, I'm with so-and-so company, blah, 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 blah. I just go, hey, send me up. And I kind of said it like, she left her wallet or her purse in my golf cart yesterday. I was just just trying to be very calm about it. Just talk like a regular person, not this like, Bob, send me this wasn't this pitching guy, which I know you've talked about a lot on your podcast. So you mentioned the percentage though, I'd go up here and then especially, at that time, the assistant would pick up. I'd say, I just need some help. And which I've always said, it's like my number one sales line of all time. Just say you need some help and sound like you do need some help, which you do. Chances are you probably are talking to the wrong person. So need some help. Who's the best person to speak to? I said, I didn't want to call everybody and their brother. And they would just say, oh, well, let me send you to so-and-so. And this was the unique thing, especially back then, John, it's a little bit less now because of technology and COVID, even though we're getting through that. But when I would get transferred down, probably 35 to 40% of the time, they'd pick up because they saw the caller ID coming from up here.
Yep.
So, but I will tell you, mentioned, to how often it works. Then how often I get these people, I probably had about a hit rate of where I'd be talking to somebody, probably 3 out of 10. 30% of the time I'd get somebody where I'd talk to them. But everybody asked me, did you ever have one that went south? And there was. I called Exxon, and I was in front of a really large audience in Vegas. I called Exxon, and I got up to this office, and this was the craziest thing. I said, hey, just send me up to so-and-so's office, thanks. And I get forwarded up, and he picks up the phone, which, by the way, I don't care how much I do this. When the CEO or the president picks up,
freak the fuck out.
I feel like telling people in training that, hey, step one, soil yourself, because that's about what you're doing. You're going, okay. Yeah. So he picked up, and I just went, oh. I said, hey, you caught me off guard. I said, I didn't expect you to pick up the phone. He goes, yeah, we got phones here. How can I help you? Oh. And I go, and I got about, I'm like, God, we had 500 people in the audience.
Shit.
And I go, oh, yeah, I know. I said, listen, I just needed some help. I was just trying to find the best person to speak. And he goes, what's your name? I said my name. And he goes, I need some help. I said, oh, great. I go, how can I help you? He goes, hang up your phone. Oh. And I just went click. Now and I'm on stage with a lavalier in my cell phone like this, so you can hear it. Yeah. And as soon as I hung it up, the kid who had me call, I should say kid, but the rep who's younger than me, right. He's the one who said, oh, call X, I'm trying to get in. So he says that. As soon as he goes, hang up your phone, I go, okay, bang. It's dead silent. And then he yells out from way in the back. He's like, see, that's my old territory. It sucks. And everyone just started laughing. So, They usually don't go bad. The reason why they don't go bad usually, and you've done this. One of the reasons why I'm such a big fan of yours, Johnny, is a lot of the content you talk about is really about being yourself and being personable and being prepared and not winging it and not sounding like you're that. Hi, I'm Bob Smith here to sell you something today. Like, just don't be that guy or that lady. And that's one of the connections I originally made with you. Is like, John brings a lot of credibility to this space. Especially when you probably had that adage where I did, where, hey, those who can do, those who can't teach. I usually introduce myself, go, if I'm you and I talked about that before, where what you do to start off a class, just kind of go, hey, hopefully by the end of the day, I'm going to earn my stripes, and here's what we're going to do. I kind of do the same thing, but I try to make sure that I let them know that I know what you're thinking. You're probably going, who is this guy, and why should I believe him? If he's that great, why is he not killing it somewhere? So I try to be vulnerable to make a connection to what they're thinking. But it usually, it works pretty good when I do this. Things have changed now with COVID, but we still get there eventually.
And I think we're going to get to a lot on this conversation to unpack. But you mentioned one thing that I used to do the exact same thing on the email side of the house. So I would do live application where we would do the exercise in class, and everybody would pick an account and they would fire it off to the CEO, and I would coach them on the email, and then they would send it. Inevitably, back about 10 years ago, in class, we would get a response from like the likes of, I mean, I got emails back from Mark Hurd, from Mark Benioff, like real big baller. And it would
That's
immediately
awesome.
drive credibility, right? Because as soon as that would happen, somebody's hand would go up, be like, I just got a response back from the CEO.
Yes.
And then it almost didn't matter what I said throughout the rest of the training.
Yeah,
So,
you're now the Messiah.
I mean, it was like
and you should
right?
see John Barrow's walk on water. Because
Right?
it's an instant street cred. Yeah.
The challenge though, and this is like nuanced here, we used to be able to do that. We used to be able to go to the C-level executive or the executive assistant and say, hey, I need your help. Who's the best person to speak with about this, right? But fast forward a few years, and I want to talk to you about what you've seen change, and COVID's changed a lot in the virtual world. But fundamentally, I want to understand from your perspective what's changed, because what I was realizing was that the response rates to that started to dip pretty significantly for a couple of reasons. One was it was being bastardized by the automation tools. And I don't want to mention any of the players in our space, but there's a few players that took specifically the email, the why you now email that we used to do, genericized it. What they would do is they would blast the C-suite and they would say, hey, who's the best person to speak with? And then that's where they would focus their effort. Again, It worked for a period of time, but I remember doing a training and I'm similar, like I'm up in front of like 300-400 people, right? And I'm talking about this top-down approach. Go to the C-suite, get referred down. You get the 86% response rate when somebody gets a referral, blah, blah, blah. It's an obligation, right? And the CEO, no shit, sits in front row. He raises his hand. He's like, I'm calling bullshit on the top-down approach. I'm like, oh boy. I'm like, all right, come on up here. Let's have this conversation, right? He's like, I get like 20 emails a day from sales reps being like, blah, blah, blah. This is what we do. Who can I talk to? And he's like, and so the point he was making was, in this day and age, you should kind of know who the best person is to speak with about your shit, right? So you're actually showing your ignorance. And because that's what he was like. He's like, what bothers me the most, he's like, when somebody reaches out to me and says, oh, we get this great HR solution. It's the best HR solution in the world. HR. Who's the best person to speak with about this? And he's like, dipshit, obviously my fucking VP of HR or my CHRO. Like, why would you be reaching out to me? So with that small nuance as kind of a preface to the evolution here, where have you seen the most fundamental changes in sales over the past 20 years?
Well, I think you nailed it in terms of just the abundance of information that we all have as reps that they get bombarded with. I think the biggest change I've seen is the bombardment of information and probably the aggressive approaches that people now take either through social media platforms, business platforms that you've talked about, that I think they just get inundated so much by it, number one. Number two is that even with that change that's happened, like you mentioned, like, oh, I call BS on that. If you've got an HR product, then why don't you just call HR? And if I was in that conversation, I go, you're right. HR is the place. But the reason why I'm calling the top-down approach, and I get that I'm calling up there because I really do need help. But one of the things I figure out is that, you can buy lists, and there's all these different applications out there of everybody in an organization, Hoovers, whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, to me, if a lot of times these people right here, like if this is like my target, like DC, like the head of HR, a lot of times these people, I don't know which one specifically might be the best one to talk to. Right. When I take this approach, I still get even when I go to this assistant here, I go, even today, I go, hey, I need some help. I know that she's really busy. I know she's slammed. Hard to probably get on her calendar. Is there someone I can do a little legwork with? And I'll say, I originally even spoke to Michelle's office, your president. I'm like, who's the best person? I know it's Barb or Bob, but who would be a great second lieutenant? What I've learned, John, a lot of my deals or opportunities, they do start at like the T-1. It's the one level below where you'll do the legwork with them. If you can get by them, they'll bring you up. And I know everybody talks about, just go to this level every time, C level. No. To me, man, if you're going to base your career and your success on just talking at that level, you're going to have a hard time selling stuff because they're hard to get to. So that I think is the number one thing. You said, what's the biggest change? I think it's hard to get to because they have technology to keep you out.
Yep.
Okay. And even though we have more technology to try to get in, and then, we're in a world right now where, every year, not too many companies I know where quota goes down. So there's a lot of pressure on these people to perform. People want expectations quicker. And, if you do something wrong, man, it's going to travel fast. we're in a world where bad news travels around the world before good news puts its boots on. So
Totally.
to me, that's the biggest change I've seen. But the other thing, John, is that when I do training, like right now, if I were to put 100 people in a room right now, I still believe that no matter how hard this got, I still believe that picking up a phone and just calling in and saying, I need some help. Nobody even, it's amazing. I'll say, raise your hand if you do this. And you'll maybe have half the audience say, I do it. I'll go, raise your hand if you do it to this level. Right. Nobody does. I very rarely do I see a rep who says, I call the CEO's office. It's very rare. And I tell people, I go, the assistant to this level right here, called the, CRO, CHO, whoever it is, this person right here, that admin assistant, or especially IT, they're getting crushed every day by calls. Right here, to me, that assistant, he or she's getting crushed by phone calls. This assistant here rarely gets as many calls, John, on the president or the CEO of the company. They don't get as many calls, so actually they're a lot nicer. So to me, even though things have progressed over time, John, this is still relatively unique that most people don't do. And they're really, really nice up here. Usually, like to me, they can't afford to be idiots. It's the president of the company. These people might be a little bit more, hey, we don't take sales calls, we're fine, bye. These ones they're usually nicer up there.
I agree. And I think there's small nuances, what you talked about, which is the shifts I've made, right? So instead of going all the way up to the C, like the generic approach at the C level and saying who I need to talk to, I now go to department head. So if I'm going on the marketing, I go CMO. If I'm going on sales, I go VP of sales. And to your point, I ask, hey, who's the best person on your team to have this conversation, to learn a little bit more? And I think you tapped into what I think is a shift happening, which is the shift from top down to bottom up and design thinking, and how design thinking is impacting sales as far as really truly learning about the client and almost being a customer of them first, right?
Yeah.
And learning the nuances of how they run their business, and then creating this hypothesis or this solution based on that knowledge to bring it to the C-suite. Because when you bring it to the C-suite, you got to be bringing value in some way, shape, or form. You got to tell them something that they either don't know or they think they know, but they're probably misinformed of because they're 5 steps removed.
But at this stage right now, even though I do pre-work, usually, John, this step is when I get to C-suite, usually, John, I've done a great job here where if it has to go there, they end up bringing me there after I've done my work. It's just maybe for me, I rarely just call on the CEO to have a conversation. I'm usually like somebody told me, like, John, your prospecting class should just be called, like in my fictitious company, this is Michelle and this is Mary on like my online training. Somebody said, your class should just be called Get Your Ass to Mary. I go, yes, that's it. Like, get to Mary, because Mary is going to give you the names of people if you do it the right way. I really don't want to talk here yet. I mean, if they pick up, I got to be ready for it, but that's rarely they'll pick up. But, you talk about going this high level. I know when I work with clients who have, and you have too, John, federal government. And I had one guy in the audience, this after I was doing this like 3 or 4 years, he's like, well, I have federal government. What are you going to do? Call the White House, the president? I went, okay. And I know the White House is 202-456-1414. That's the White House. Yes. So I would call the White House, and they don't give a name. They just go operator 42. And I'm like, hey, I need some help. And all of this obviously is public knowledge when you're federal government. But I would still do the whole, hey, you need some help. Who's the best person? And they're like, well, that's the Deputy Director of Defense in the Pentagon, that's so-and-so, whatever, Robert Gates or whoever, right? And you go, okay, and they're not allowed to transfer. But the cool thing about especially calling in government, when you then hang up and you call into the Pentagon, they pick it up like Chief Petty Officer Johnson. And then I'll go, hey, I was just talking to the White House and they need some help. I'm trying to track down, whatever. Usually they go hang on and they'll find a subordinate pretty fast. I always tell people federal government, this actually works even better because I think they still respect the hierarchy sometimes of the titles, maybe more than the business world. But anyway, it's fun. You and I both being speakers, they always say there's 3 things we don't talk about, right? You never talk about, sex, religion, or politics. And the only political statement I make is that when I was calling, I called the White House a couple of times when President Trump was there. And my only fear was I thought he might pick up.
Yeah, right.
So I don't know what that guy was up to. Yeah, so that's my only political joke.
What is you brought up something here, and I'm interested in your perspective on this because you talked about authenticity up front and cutting through the bullshit and being yourself, right? What's the line for you of the trick versus the tactic. And I say that because you had said, for instance, hey, I was just talking to the White House. Okay. Now that is a factual statement. That is a factual statement, right? You did not lie in any way, shape, or form, but there is a little bit of not telling the full truth on that one, right? Of whatever, because you're trying to get that right? And I fight it a lot of, because people ask a lot of tips that you hear all this time. Hey, tips and tricks, right? And I say no. Give me tips. Don't give me tricks. Like, don't give me some bullshit thing. Like, even small things from me, like putting RE in the subject line in your first email to pretend like it's a response to your first one.
Right.
Like, don't fucking do that. Or when you're calling a secretary and you get the cell phone number and then you call the cell phone number of the person and you blame it on the I didn't realize this was your cell phone number.
That's a lie. That's a lie.
It's a lie.
Yeah.
So what's your kind of definition of that fine line between saying maybe not the entire truth because you want to get their attention and kind of get to the main reason versus using a trick to get to that part?
John, when I did my original CDs, like 15, 17 years ago, whenever it was, I remember that I used to do that where I was guilty of kind of being tricky. I would, hey, I just talked to Bob's office. He said we should speak. And I was really doing it, especially at that time, because when I was on stage for a couple hours, I'm like, I got to get this phone to call me back. I got to get the phone to ring. Kind of like your email example, right, John, where you're like, oh my God, they're replying back and now you walk on water, right?
Yeah.
So I remember doing that. Part of me, I wish I could kind of take that one track off because I've massaged that, because I realized at the end of the day, I would tell the audience, I go, listen, they're going to call back and go, okay, who the hell are you? You didn't give me your company name. You just said you talked to my boss's boss. Yeah. But when they call back, though, I told people, I go, when they call back, okay, and I'll get to the trick part, because when they call back, though, if you now sound like a salesman going, hey, Bob, thanks for the call. Yeah, I actually work for so-and-so. It's over. You're an idiot. You get thrown out. You got to go, when they call back, you have to go, hey, listen, I know I left you an abbreviated message with nothing on it, because to be candid with you, if I leave the usual message, no one calls me back. And if I were you, I wouldn't call me back either. But I really did call Bob's office. I really did. If you want to talk to him, I did. I needed some help. I just left you a quick message. So I made sure when they call back, I explained myself really quick, like, hey, I did this for a reason. I knew you wouldn't call back. I wouldn't call me back either. So I tried to be vulnerable. I don't do that really harsh technique anymore. So when you said that fine line, and I'm probably giving you the brevity of it today, when I call the president's office and, let's pretend it's Michelle, and Michelle's assistant, Mary, says, yes, this is who you should talk to. When I go there now, I explain why. I go, hey, if it's Bob, I go, hey, Bob, I just spoke with Michelle's office, Michelle Smith, your president. I go, I'm completely lost. I know I probably should be talking to marketing. It may not be you at this stage, but I said I need some help. I was also going to send up an email just introducing our two organizations. I said, but I wanted to reach out to you first. So I'm more vulnerable right out of the gate, but I do more of an explanation of how I got to him and what I did, not, hey, this is me and how great I am and how much I can help you. That's what I don't do. I just try to validate, listen, dude, I'm not an idiot. I don't want to trick you. I'm telling you, this is exactly why I did what I did. I need some help, because they might say, Bob's retiring in 30 days. Who knows? Right. And so I'm just more vulnerable now, John, than I ever was before. I heard Michael Dell say that, and Michael Dell said that in the podcast. They asked him what was the biggest change in him in the last 10 or 20 years. And he just said vulnerability. He's so much more vulnerable now than he was before. And I think that's exactly where I am, especially even more so after, me being sick. I'm way more just honest and vulnerable now after getting past cancer and stuff. I'm like, I just come from a place of just focusing on, I kind of try to come, this sounds corny, I just try to come from a place of love all the time. I try to come from a place of just focus on helping people, man. If you just focus on helping people, you'll crush it. If you just focus on hitting your number, you'll probably still hit your number. You're just going to sound like everybody else doing it.
What's up, everybody? I know you're enjoying this conversation. John does a great job with genuine curiosity on these episodes, and our guests consistently bring the heat. We want to take a moment here and let you know that you've got an opportunity to become better than you were yesterday. And you can do so by gaining access to all of JB Sales content. All of their training, tips, techniques, tactics, and takeaways can be yours for $1 a day. $365 for the year gets you annual access to everything, including our private Slack channel for members only, which you get access to all of us directly 100% of the time, 24 hours a day. And then at the same time, you're going to get access to our bi-weekly Ask Me Anything sessions, where you can bring real deals to the table and get the help that you need where you need it. This is very, very important. Sales reps that invest in themselves are often found at the tops of their leaderboards. Join us today and get the help you need to become the seller that you deserve to be. That URL, one more time, is joinjbsales.com. Let's get back to the show with JB and our guest for this week.
We'll get to that transformation for you because I'm in the similar stuff. What's your?
I know you are.
What's your take? Because this is kind of, you just explained mine on fake it till you make it, right? Early in my career, for instance, I did fundamentally believe in fake it till you make it because you're so young, you don't know what you're talking about, but there's that level of confidence that you can come across and people will gravitate towards it. And as I've evolved and as I've grown, I realized, no, don't fake it till you make it. Be more vulnerable, be more open. But it's kind of like rich people who weren't rich and then became rich and then say money doesn't matter. You know what I love those fucking Instagram posts where somebody's like, oh, it's not about the money as they cry in their fucking Lamborghini. It's like, all right, asshole, let me rip all that money away from you and tell me if money's not important. So stop telling me that money's not important when you're a multimillionaire. So I feel like I'm wondering from like me, am I that guy? Like, is that philosophy based on my experience and where I am at 46 years old and all the stuff that I've done? But should I still have a line of fake it till I make it if I was the 22, 23, 24-year-old kid? Because the whole I don't know is a frustrating, it's a valid answer for sales reps to give to a prospect, but it's also a frustrating answer in this world of instant gratification. It's like, okay, well, I called you because I want to know if your product does this one thing, or can you answer that? Well, I don't know. I'm going to have, you know what? I'll find the answer for you. Like the tolerance for that is less. So, so where are you on, you and I think we've both thrown fake it till you make it because we just know, humility, we're not as good as we think we are. Like, we're just fucking humans here. But for that 22, 23, 24-year-old kid, what do you think their mentality should be around fake it till you make it?
I think their mentality, I know it sounds corny, if they really do have a passion to help people, I think that's one thing. It kind of gives you this piece of going, I just want to help people, but I don't want to say I don't know, because that's their biggest fear. When you and I have done this, John, where you asked those 20-somethings, usually their biggest fear is, oh my gosh, if they ask me a question, I don't know the answer to. Yep. And one of the things I try to tell people, I said, listen, I'm in my late 50s. I do the same thing now as I try to do the same thing now as I did when I was younger. When you were younger, especially when you start with a company, you didn't know a lot and you were scared that they would ask you that. So if they did, you got nervous. So what you did, since you didn't have the answer, you said is, I don't know, or you go, well, why'd you ask that question? What's the driver behind it? What are you looking to accomplish? And I know it sounds like a diversion a little bit, but if you really don't know something, I usually tell people, even if you know something, like there's this thing I draw, John, like this snowman. When you're brand new, like the small part of the head of this, when you don't know anything, they'll ask you a question. You go, good question. Why did you ask? And you're saying this because you're going, no, that is a good question. I really don't know either. Right. Well, then you become, now you're a little bit seasoned. You've been with the company a couple of years. You know everything. So now when they ask you a question, you know what happens? You now answer it. And you probably don't know why they're asking it. You just answer it. Well, then if you're this part, like you're now down here kind of fat, have a lot of information, you know the answer, but you act like this person on purpose. Yeah. So to answer your question, I tell reps, act like the admitting nurse to a hospital. If you could just put yourself to where, you don't do the brain surgery. You're not in the cancer center. You're not in the emergency room. Your job is to try to understand where they're at, where they're trying to go. And that doesn't require brilliance and a ton of knowledge. It requires great questions. It requires you to be a good listener. Well, anybody could do that. You can come up with great questions about where you at, where you want to go. Let's talk about either your people, your process, your program, your technology. There's not that many things to talk about when you want to go from here to there. Here, I'll give you a great example, John. I asked, I remember that the head of training to, obviously that incredibly large company, the business unit wanted to train me, but the budget was coming out of training and enablement, which I know you've dealt with that before, where the salespeople want you, but they're the ones paying. Yeah. And sometimes in our space, John, sometimes we can be perceived a little bit as a competition or a threat to the training department. They probably tried it before, and that's why the business unit is going, let's go get somebody else, right? Yeah. So he asked me one time, so this gentleman said, hey, do you do online training? Now, in this case, with our example, John, I could go on for a half an hour. I go, well, yeah, my name's on the door. It's called Costigan Academy, but I could just keep going and going and going. And that kind of that snowman I drew, where that first part is like, you don't know what you're doing yet. The middle part, you have the answer. The bottom part, act like you don't have the answer. And I said to him, I go, well, yeah, we have it, but why'd you ask? And he goes, because we don't believe in online training.
Nice.
And my brain just went, thank God I didn't go off on the 5-minute answer about, well, yeah, we have this Costigan Academy, we have testing and all this stuff like what you have with yours. Right. Thank God I didn't do that. And then, of course, I start going, why? Right. Well, it must have gone on for, I don't know, 7-8 minutes where I kept going like, why, without saying why, because I didn't want him to go like, why, you an idiot. But I said, okay, I'd be like, okay, well, then what? And then what? And after about 7 or 8 minutes, it came to the point where he was telling me that no one was going on it. They weren't using it. So they just didn't see it was bringing value to the reps. And after a lot of exploration, I finally got to the point where I said this line. I said, so it sounds like, because I said, who was the person doing it? He said, me. And I said, so do you think at all that there might be a challenge where they may not be going on because the person doing it? And it was like, he was just like, yeah, I guess that could be the reason. And I said, how do you feel about that? And he goes, well, is this something you could do? And that's how we got to that. And I said, well, I could do it, but do you want me to do my stuff or your stuff? I don't know if I can jump in and start doing Amazon stuff because he's like, well, no. And then boom. But that to me was a great way of where even when I had the answer, John, and you talk about that fake it till you make it, to me, it's not that hard to say, good question, why'd you ask when someone asks you? But if you could drill down on that and be really good at keeping it back in their cord, that sometimes by the end of the 7 or 8 minutes after they asked the question, you never even gave the damn answer yet, but you let them talk. And yeah, now if it comes to a point where you go, all right, let me do this. Let me get all this information together. Let's schedule another call. See, to me, what I don't like is when someone asks me a question and then they go, hey, well, I'm really not sure. Let me schedule a call. Like, no, I love when they go, tell me why you're asking. And it goes on for a while. Now they're really motivated to have the next call versus I don't know, let me schedule a meeting for you.
So this is a great point because I talk about how the world I personally live in, and I think it sounds like you do too, is between the give a shit factor and the unconscious competence factor, right? You know, that whole quadrant where you start something and you're unconsciously incompetent, right? So I can't do anything unless you give a shit, right? But once you give a shit, I will give you all these techniques so that you can eventually get to the point where you're unconsciously competent. I think you and I probably, for a lot of what we do from a sales standpoint, we don't follow the script, like how we actually train it, because it is so ingrained in us and how we do it. So for instance, I had to go through these, learning about questioning skills, open-ended, close-ended, and all that other stuff, but then layering questions. And layering questions are tell me more, give me an example of, could you clarify for me, right? That type of thing. And at the time I used them as a technique, as a tactic, because being from Boston, I talk really fast and my gut is to answer you immediately. Like whenever you ask me a question, my gut is to absolutely answer you immediately because I think I got the answer to it, right? Especially when I was younger. But I actually forced those into my vocabulary because what I was experiencing was when I answered the question, and this is you can always tell when you fucked up, because I've done this before where somebody's asked me the question. I'm like, oh, I've heard that a million times before. Let me give them this perfect, like to your point of like the online stuff, right? It's like, oh, I got this perfect answer to this. And then at the end of your beautiful 2-minute soliloquy, if you will, of explaining all the nuances of why you're, what you're talking about, at the end they go, well, what I meant to say was, right? And then you're like, son of a bitch, right? So I even had it on my whiteboard, like layering questions to force myself to slow down. But the benefit of it, the primary goal was for me to shut the hell up and slow down. But the long-term benefit was exactly what you explained, which is people would start telling me more information, giving me more insights into what really the problem was. And then I'd be able to, my answer to whatever that was of their question was vastly different after I got that information. Because I was like, oh, there's the context around that question. It's the same thing with objection handling. When you give me an objection, it's usually a surface objection and we dig a little bit deeper. Let me tell the context around it. Now I can handle that objection. So is that do you feel like I can't imagine you haven't reached a level of unconscious competence with much of what you actually train, and your challenge these days of boiling it down into the specific tactics that people can use who aren't at your level?
Well, personally, I always get challenged like you. Exactly. I get challenged. I have to continue to remember, shut up and seek to understand versus seek to just talk and explain. So that is a very conscious thing for me, even in personal relationships. I don't care if my ex-wife or somebody asks me a question, hey, are you at the house? I'm in Cary. I'll be like, yeah, why do you ask? I mean, and I don't say like a jerk. I'm like, hi, yeah, do you need something? Doesn't matter. I'm always trying to seek to understand. And I think that came from, I saw this came up, and obviously, I don't know if you do this, John. I don't think if you do, please steal it. Because I really, it's like one of the things that happened live in class. I went, oh my God, this is really cool. I bet this happens to you, where something happens in you class and you go, that was really good. Like, put that in a book. That was pretty cool shit that just happened. Totally. A lot of our stuff gets created because we're live in front of people. You go, oh, that's cool. And so there's, I read this article that, and I think it's very common. I think it came out of the Keenan Flagler School of Business here in the Carolinas. They were talking about why customers do or don't do business with you. And they said, what's the number one thing that customers don't like about salespeople? Pretty much the number one answer is that you don't understand their business. That's one of the biggest fears, that they want you to know that you understand their business. Like a doctor, you want to make sure they have empathy and they understand what you're going through. Same thing in business. Well, one day in class, I was just doing this on a board. And I said, don't understand your business. And I wrote this and I said, don't be dumb. And people looked at me and I go, the number one thing that people don't, they don't want is don't understand my business. So if a client ever says, the biggest thing I don't like about you is you don't understand my business. And so, don't understand my business. I go, you are being dumb and stupid too. I just don't have an acronym for stupid. So, so to me, I don't know if that answers your question, but to me, it's that, it's a very conscious approach, but I'm always really driven by usually 80 to 90% of the reason why somebody asks you a question, there's usually meaning behind it. And if someone says, I was just wondering, I've kind of learned in my life, I'm just wondering is bullshit. There's usually something underneath it. Doesn't mean it's good or bad. There's always intention of, like I mentioned the example, if my ex-wife goes, hey, are you at the house? I go, why? There's got to be intention. She's just not calling to check if I'm home or not. Right. There's something going on. She wants to pick something up, or maybe the kids left something here or something. But I always try to live by that of just understand where they're coming from before you open your mouth and say something.
Let's transition to, because you talk a lot about why, right? So why are we calling? Why are we selling? Have a passion for what you do, those type of things. And all that stuff matters to me now more than ever. And I want to talk about your why, because obviously, and the audience doesn't know it, we've alluded to it briefly, but you've gone through some shit relatively recently. And I'm wondering if that's changed your perspective. So you want to give the audience a little glimpse into kind of the journey you've been on in the past year and a half, 2 years?
Thank you, John. Yeah, it is completely, well, having cancer does change you. It has to. I even did some videos I was going to post on YouTube. It was just going to be, the stuff they don't tell you about cancer. And I really believe if they really told you everything, you may not go through it, because and no matter what they tell you, it's like having kids. You just don't know until you have kids. I don't care how much you talk about it. You don't know until you have it. Well, same thing with cancer. You just don't know until you really go through it, and all the little things they don't tell you. But that I spoke a couple of weeks ago in Atlanta, and I didn't, you and I are the same, where sometimes we'll just say something, you're like, well, that was pretty good. Yeah. And I said to the audience, somebody asked me a question about it, and I said, I don't wish cancer on anybody, but I wish you could maybe learn the lessons I've just learned from cancer. And the lesson I learned, probably the biggest thing I've learned is I can't believe how much time I spent worrying about shit that was just shit. That was probably the biggest one, number one. Number two, I don't think that was probably number one. Number two was, and it probably should be flip-flop, but number two was I just can't, I had no clue how important family and friends were during that process. They really, really, there's some really tough, dark days there. And you can't, when they say don't go it alone, it's really hard to go it alone. You need that support system. So for me, I had such a more appreciation for my friends and my brothers and my sisters. And here's the other thing, it was really weird, John. I was probably selfish when this started. I didn't know how much it impacted them when I kept saying, no, I'm good. Like you give them the Heisman, you go, no, because they all wanted to help. I was like, no. And I'm good because I thought I was a burden to them. And what I realized was I wasn't allowing them to love me. And that's an emotional thing to talk about. I forgot. I'm like, they're now happier that I'm saying yes.
Yeah.
And because now they feel better that they get to help Johnny, because that's how I'm known to my brothers and sisters as Johnny. And I saw such a big difference in that connection between us because I allowed them to help me, as opposed to I thought I was doing the right thing by going, no, I'm good. You have a life. And it was the complete opposite, John. And I know with you and your father, I'm sure that you've had some of these same experiences as well.
That it was such a realization for me. But it was actually my aunt. So my aunt passed away not soon after my dad. And she was 60. She ripped roaring cancer. Like one day she was fine, and less than 2 weeks later she was fucked, right? And her son, who is, turning 40 now, 46. So he's my second cousin, if you will. He literally said that exact thing. Like my aunt my cousin's the one who passed away. My aunt is my favorite person on the planet, right? She's been through more shit than you could possibly imagine. And I'm desperately like, she lives an hour and a half away from me. The rest of the family isn't that close. So I'm like, I just want to help in some way, shape, or form. And she would just put up this wall, like, I'm fine, don't. And I was having conversation with her nephew, Justin, and he said that. He said, you know what, John? He's like, it's actually selfish to not accept the help from other people, because what you're doing is you're robbing yourself of that help, which you absolutely fucking need, but you're also robbing them from their happiness, because if they do something for you, it makes them feel useful. And right now, if you don't let them, they feel they feel like they're helpless to help you. And that is a horrible feeling when you so want to help, but the person that you're trying to doesn't allow you. This is also what I learned about gratitude. Same thing with gratitude, in the sense that I used to, like, if I ever did something for somebody or whatever, and they would come and say, thank you, right? Oh, don't worry about it. It's no big deal. And actually what I realized was that diminishes the value of what I did for them. Because now by me saying, oh, it's no big deal, now they're like, no, it actually was a big deal for me, which is why I'm coming to you and thanking you for that. And you to demean that now takes away the part of the value that you brought to me for doing that.
What event in your life triggered that that lesson to you, John? Was it with your aunt, or did you feel that way before that, you just were grateful that you were able to apply it again?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was something I always understood. I've always been, especially on the gratitude side, don't worry about it. We're good. That type of thing. That's the part I've always been challenged with. And I think my trip to Sedona, after, getting my shit together and really reflecting on gratitude as a huge part of what kept me through the hard times that I was going through, I realized that gratitude is a two-way street. And it's not just like, oh, you give gratitude and other people give it back. No. You actually have to give and receive gratitude. It's just like being a sore loser or a sore winner, right? You want to be a good winner. You want to be a good loser. You want to be a good steward of gratitude in a lot of ways. And so now, even on apologies, here's another one where somebody comes and oh, John, I'm so sorry for whatever. Don't worry about it. It's no big deal. The amount of effort and mental anguish that person probably had to go through to get to the point where they came to you and apologized is not insignificant. And so for you to be like, don't worry about it, it's no big deal. Like, as long as it doesn't happen again, like, you're literally diminishing that angst that they had to come to you and be as vulnerable as they could. And so now what I do is when somebody says thank you, or I'm like, specifically, hey, I apologize. Hey, I accept your apology.
Yeah.
And I just let it sit. I don't say it's no big deal anymore. I don't say, just make sure it doesn't happen again. I stop and I say, I accept your apology.
Really, that happens. You're right. Most people do the latter. Yeah, no, we're good. It's all good.
All good.
Yeah. No,
Same thing with gratitude. When somebody says thank you, I stop and I say you're welcome.
Yeah.
Like literally, like before, because again, demeaning it. Oh, it's now I just like in sales, right? Pause for a second or two, make sure that they understand the importance of your response, and then say your response and let it sit, and then see what happens with them. You'll see them go. It's weird now from a psychology standpoint, because now because that almost never happens. You see people try to figure out what's going on. Like, is this a game or something? And you're like, you don't want to keep arguing with me about this. And no, no, you said you're sorry. I accept your apology, right? So, or you said thank you, you're welcome. So you do have to find some bridges to get to the comfortable part to give them the uncomfortable, break off that silence. Yeah. But I am very conscious now when somebody says thank you for anything, buying dinner, whatever, you're welcome. And it makes a difference.
Even, I know it's funny, the connection here, which me, I'll probably screw it up. I'll go, no, hey, I know this is really hard for you to say, I'm sorry. They'll probably be like, no, dude, it wasn't that hard. I'm just sorry. Move on. I'll be the therapist on it.
Totally. Yeah.
Like when I get done golf with my buddies, especially now, because a lot of them were so supportive when I, had my throat cancer that, because I couldn't talk for 4 months. I was eating out of a feeding tube. I lost 55 pounds. I had to learn how to just swallow again. That's why even today, you see, I'm drinking water all the time, and to be with you for 4.5 hours, as opposed to guys just going, good round, you head off. So I think there's a lot of little moments in our lives that we really can show gratitude and appreciation for just the little things in life, like golfing, man, or just even an apology. So all really good stuff.
And let's finish on this one, going back to your why, because you mentioned something on family, right? And values and friends and those type of things. And I'm a bigger believer now than ever about values and your why and knowing those and being true. But what was interesting to me was I used a business coach, right, to reset on my why and my values. And values don't usually change. They shouldn't, your core fundamental values, they shouldn't really change, but they should be reprioritized every once in a while. And I realized that.
Absolutely.
Because what I asked when I went through the exercise of the values, there's all these words. They put 50, 100 words on a plate, and you pare them down to the 20 that you like, and then you pare them down to the 5, and then you prioritize them. And family was on the list. And so I asked my business coach, I said, well, isn't family just kind of the default number one priority, right? Like, isn't that just an assumed, that's your priority type of thing? And he goes, absolutely not. He goes, you have to really put it down on the list and make it the number one priority so you can consciously commit to it versus thinking that it's your priority. And you can always come excuses around why, you can justify it. And it hit me like a ton of bricks because I was like, son of a bitch. Because, for a solid 10 years, my daughter's 11. So for probably 8 of her, right before COVID, I was a weekend dad. And the way I was justifying it was, I'm doing this for my family. I'm doing this for my family, so my daughter doesn't have to worry about stuff. My wife can do what she wants to do, that type of thing. And if I reflect on it, I wasn't. The reason I was doing what I did, was because I was really fucking good at what I did. You know what I mean? And you know this. I mean, there's just something about
it. And it brought you joy. You're a competitive guy. There's a lot of things that was feeding, kind of, for lack of a better word,
ego.
I'd say ego, but it does feed you because
100% ego.
It's all of it, right?
To tell somebody, to tell somebody I went to Singapore for a day, I went to Japan for a couple days, and I'm back here, and people are like, oh my God, I can't believe you went that far. I mean, there's just something about you know what I mean? I'm the man. And so I was pretending like family was my priority when it really wasn't. And when I wrote it down through this exercise and made it my number one, it really changed my perspective. So with what you went through, how did that reshape, or did it reshape your why and your values? And what do you look at now as a priority over what maybe you thought was a priority and you put as a priority, but you weren't living it that way?
Well, the latter is the one thing it did for me is I really started to I wanted to like myself a lot more. That's what I wanted to do. I like you. I was like you, Johnny. I was traveling all over the world, and I thought I was supporting my family, and I was, and still do. But to me, I just felt that I had more to offer than what I was offering before. It's just as a person, as a family member, as a friend, even as a father, as an ex-husband, all of it. It just made me rethink that. I saw something that said I think the average human being lives 29,850 days. Well, right now I'm at 21,000. I got 7,000 something left, man. Yeah. And I'm 7,000 days left. How can you make the best of them? And the first thing is, and it's so funny, I'll talk to friends about it, and I don't tell everybody, and I'll say, I've talked to therapy, and Howard Stern asks everybody, you go to therapy, and it's almost the point where I don't know who hasn't gone to therapy. But when I go, they kind of, the first thing is you got to hopefully really, really like yourself, and you feel like you have something good to give somebody. And that's been the biggest turn for me, is just to try to really be the best friend, person, all of it that I can be. And that doesn't even, business is now down like second or third level. And we started off our conversation, you talked about, making millions and then getting to be successful. And Tim Ferriss, I love listening to Tim. His podcasts are, hundreds of millions of people listen to him, 4-hour work week and all that. And he just said the thing that he learned as well is that when you finally get to that destination of money, it wasn't what you expected. And it's almost like you're waiting for the Macy's Day Parade and it never happens. Right. And there was this illusion that you probably almost became delusional about. And that's, I think, happened to me a little bit, where I finally felt that I was at a point financially successful, and it didn't give me the happiness I thought. And that's why cancer was a really big blessing for me, because it just really made me realize what's really important. And I want to be the best version of myself. So depending on what I end up doing, I mean, obviously I'm been single now, but now I feel like I finally have something really good to give somebody. Yeah. And a really good version of myself that I don't think I really knew. I don't think I was aware of it before that. So I don't know if that was the second part of your question. But that's how I look at it now. And so between that, and then John, since I really like me a lot now, it sounds crazy, but since I really like this guy, then when I talk on the phone and I do business, I really like that guy too. I think he's selling from a different place now. Okay. Yeah, I always focus on helping people, but now I just feel like the intent is so much higher to when I'm talking to business people. I am truly trying to figure out where they're at, where they want to go. And if this isn't a fit, I'm out, because I want you happy, and go take somebody else. Because I think we both have done deals. I remember earlier, I've done deals, and I know I signed it and I did it. I'm like, what did you do? You knew this was going to be a pain in the ass. You knew this was going to be, and you shouldn't have done it. No. And and obviously I think that happens with wisdom the older you get. But that's been the biggest life-changing thing for me, is just really liking myself now a lot more than I ever did. And that sounds I don't want that to sound narcissistic, but it was a revelation.
No, I've known this for a long time, right? Like, you can't love anybody else unless you love yourself. And loving yourself is one thing, but liking yourself is another thing, right? Like, you can love yourself. It's like your kids, right? I tell them all the time. I tell my daughter all the time, I love you unconditionally, no matter what you do. But there's days I do not like you. You know what I mean? Like, I just fundamentally don't like you because you're being a little shit. You know what I mean? So but I'll always love you, right? So. And you mentioned something, just to finish up on the value of time. And I think there is a bell curve to this, where all of a sudden you start thinking, and for you, obviously, there was a forcing function for you to really start to respect time and however many hours you have left. One thing that somebody said to me recently was the time you have for others is also finite in so many ways. And once you come to this conclusion, you start to look at it differently. And the example that I heard, I forget who it was on this podcast I was listening to, but it might've been Tim Ferriss, actually. And they said, look, like, how old is your mom? Right. And the person was like, oh, I don't know. She's probably 60 years old. Right. And he's like, so how, and the average age span here in the United States is 80, call it 85. Right. So you think you got 25 years left with your mom, right? Yeah. I got 25 years left. No. Well, let me ask you this. How often do you see your mom? Like, how many times a year do you see your mom? And they're like, I usually do one of the holidays, and we usually kind of make it a point to at least meet up at least one other time. So probably 2 times a year. He goes, so you do realize you only have 50 more times with your mom, right?
Wow.
And all of a sudden I was like, holy shit. Like, my dad passed away, right? Last year. My mom's turning 80 this year. And I only see her 2-3 times a year. So I'm sitting there going, I got fucking 10 meetings left with my mom. Wow. And so now every moment that I get a chance, or every chance I get to be with her, I will go out of my way to be with her, because after that, I'll have 9 more times with my mom. After that, I'll have 6, you know what I mean? And when you start looking at it that way, you start to appreciate things so much more. Of what's really.
Yeah, that's great. It's almost like when you finally put a pencil to it. It's almost like running a financial plan. When you run it out and you look at it, what's that called? When power legitimacy. When you finally see something in writing, you put a pencil to it. yeah, because if not, I think we're, you can't see the forest through the trees, and just time goes by, and another day goes by, another day goes by. And yeah, no, I love that. That's good.
Yeah. I think I wish, like, I still struggle with what you and I think are at right now. And what we try to do is I always say, I want to help reps skip a few steps, not make as many mistakes, but you got to make the mistakes. You got to get punched in the face. But I think the perspective is such an interesting thing for me from an age standpoint, right? Like around 40, I just started getting a vastly different perspective on life than I had. I thought time was limitless in my teens and my 20s, and how fucking, if you're 50, you're an ancient, right? And now I look at it and I'm like, holy shit, if I'm lucky, I have another 30 years left in doing what I'm doing here. You know what I mean? On this planet, trying to make a difference, if I'm lucky. And, you start putting that finite pin on it, and you start to reprioritize a lot of shit. So, for reps out there listening, I think it's really important that you identify your why and your core values, but I think it's also extremely important that you keep revisiting those on a consistent basis.
Yeah, they change. I mean, can you imagine finding the notes, John, of what you wrote 30 years ago, 20 years ago, what was important to you, and then looking at them now?
Nah.
And I think it's real important to revisit those often. It is huge. They've changed so much. And again, back to that, just in our podcast today and talking, I don't wish cancer on anybody, but if there's something I wish that people can get some of the lessons that I've learned through cancer. And one of them is just gratitude and being grateful. And I think, John, you and I talk about social media, and you put stuff out there, and it could really, we're in a world where people can blow stuff up, take it the wrong way. But I just look at, if you come from gratitude and just focus on helping people, and you really believe in your heart and soul, the things usually are going to work out for you, man. And I don't know how you can bastardize that message, because I think people might go, well, yeah, look at John Barrows, John Costigan, they've already kind of, whatever that term made it means, or success, whatever that means to you. But, like Coach K in his book, he just, it's truly, it really, I think the older we get, John, it really is the destination, not the, sorry, it's the journey.
It's
the journey, not the destination. Because when you get there, it's almost a letdown. It's almost a little bit of a letdown. Like, well, now what?
It almost always is in my experience, is because it's like, oh, you know what I mean? Like, you get to their point, you get to the top, you get to the dollar figure, whatever it is, and you realize nothing's really changed. You know what I mean? And I've also, you can look at the studies on this as far as lottery winners, like people who don't earn what they get tend to be worse off later on than they were before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, it's almost like their core belief doesn't match up to the volume of money. And exactly. I don't know if Anthony Robbins or somebody talked about that, where I think one of the best ways to retain that money, other than being somewhat, competent with a financial planner or what have you, but is the more time you give towards helping others, like charity work and stuff, that kind of raises your self-esteem. And that way you feel better that you almost now deserve this pile of money, right? Exactly. So he was kind of saying that, we all have heard the why me syndrome, like why me when something bad happens to me. Well, I think one of the things that lottery winners go through when they win the lottery, they say it could be a year, 2 years, 3 years into it, they actually might have a little bit of the why me? How did I win this thing? Right. It's almost sometimes the same thing. So
the opposite of the negative, right?
Yeah, the opposite approach.
Why was I blessed with this cash? And
exactly.
What can I do with it?
I think for a lot of your audience and the reps and stuff, I know that this is stuff that these two old guys are talking about, but I hope in your 20s, I know we reference some things of hopefully what we can do to help them in their business careers. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a journey, and they're going to fail. And I think it's in the second page of my book. I just said, hey, the most successful people I met in my life, they hit a wall and they figure out a way around it. And if you were to ask me what I would have done different, as maybe, and you just said this from a business perspective, John, I probably wish I would have done a little bit more as a parent, because I was on the road. I'd come home, I probably rescued too quick. And what I learned is that the more I let my kids fail, the more I knew, the more I did that, the better tools they got to survive and succeed older in life. Yeah. And if you're there to always pick them up, they don't know how to get up anymore. Nope. And in business, the same thing. When I was managing people, I think I would try to rescue quicker. And then I'm like, no, they just got to go figure it out. They got to fail, because that's how you learn.
Well, and also to bring it full circle on the values thing, I think it's also critically important to instill values in your kids to be able to weather the storm, right? I think it's more important than anything because I tell my daughter this, she's 11, and she's at that age where, her best friends when she was growing up are kind of diverting. You know what I mean? Like you're starting to see this.
Right.
And it's like, oh man, right? And she's, they're reacting in certain ways that she doesn't appreciate, and she's getting in trouble because she says certain things and it gets taken a different way. And I go, sweetheart, I know this is almost impossible for you to comprehend at this point, but if you have strong values, right? Because I brought my value exercise to her, and I said, hey, let's just go through this. Let's understand what your values are, right? And when we nail that down, I said, look, now you can feel a lot better about what you're doing and how people are reacting to you because you're coming from a good place. The only time you should feel bad is if you do something that goes against these values. Because if it goes against those values, you're going to feel something in your gut that's just not right, and you know why it's not right. But if you don't have them written down, again, you can fake it till you make it, in a sense. Yeah. Oh yeah, no, that's I'm going to do this. I know it's okay, but I know it's not great, but I'm going to do it because that type of thing. But when you look it down on a piece of paper and say, family is my number one priority here for me personally, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, should I go out and play golf for 5 hours and get drunk with my buddies? When I've been on the road for 5 days straight and haven't seen my wife and kids for that long? Like, no, I'm not going to go play golf. You know what I mean? Or when I'm selling, if I fundamentally don't agree with where you're coming from, or you say something that demeans somebody else and it goes against my values, I got no problem telling you to fuck off. You know what I mean? Right. And you might go blast out about it and be like, oh, this guy told me to fuck off and that type of thing. It's like, well, yeah, this is why I told you to fuck off. And so, if you understand that, you can be a lot more at peace with yourself and what you're doing in this world to make a difference. So,
well, with your daughter, obviously, I love that story of the values with her, and I know we've heard the term, and that's another thing I think we think about a lot, John, is there's a big difference between support and enable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that's the wonderful thing. Your daughter always knows you're there for support. And I think we also, as parents, as well as bosses, we don't want to enable, though, either. Yeah. You got to figure it out. You got to let people fail and figure it out themselves.
Exactly. Awesome, John. Well, I think we could talk about shit for hours here, whether it's sales, business, or life. I think we crossed a lot of chasms here, but in the interest of time, and probably we'll do another one of these coming up here soon. Where do you want people to go? I know you got books, you got your site, you got all sorts.
It's all on johncostigan.com. Or that's probably the best place. Or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's easy to find me there too. But no, that's it. I just, whatever, the online training, this stuff is there. Yeah. But to me, that's I only got one place to go. That's for me. I know we talk about all your different brands. I don't know how you keep them straight, but I'm just one. I know how, because you're smarter than I am, dude. Plus, Johnny, you're still young. I'm 59. I'm like, I just go, no, I just want one thing. That's it. Just either train or speak. That's it. Done. I used to do the consulting thing and all that. It just, I'm at a point in my life now, man. I just simplify stuff. So why? Because golf is now my kids are old and they're not young like yours. So they are gone. Jack's in Nashville, Grace is in LA. So golf is actually taking over a lot of my life now.
Love it.
Other than giving back. Thanks, man. And by the way, I know you and I are in the same space, and this has just been something I'm so great you're doing, and I'm jealous. I think it's great that you do it. I'm honored just to even be with you, man, because I know you could think like, well, don't they kind of both, compete for the same thing? And I know there's been opportunities you and I have competed on, and probably a great way to close this out is that there was a great line that Tony Bennett said that Frank Sinatra told him. And Tony, when he's just coming on the scene, he was getting a little worried that he would actually be able to find enough work. And Frank heard him saying one time, and Frank said, Tony Bennett said, when you're good, there's enough to go around for everybody. Yeah. And I think that I'll never forget that line. I think I heard it 20 years ago. And when I look at you, my brain just goes, he's good. And I hope I'm halfway good. And if you're halfway good or halfway decent, there's enough to go around for everybody. Doesn't matter if you win here, you lose there. As long as you sell with integrity and just believe what you're doing and you do the right things, there's enough for everybody if you're good at what you do. So, and that's how I look at you. I go, this guy's really good at what he does, and that's why he's successful. So it's an honor to be here, man.
Always been a fan too. And I think that falls in line with, I think a quote I heard about like life isn't a zero sum game. You know what I mean? Like if I win, that doesn't mean somebody else has to lose. Right.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm a Simon Sinek fan, and his whole
Yep.
game, his whole infinite game versus the finite game. Like the
Yeah.
finite game would be having me look at you as a competitor and being like, oh, fuck, I got to make sure I beat John in the next deal or whatever it is. Because whatever the infinite game is, I'm just trying to stay in the game, man. Like I'm just trying to stay in the game. And so competition, fucking, like I tell my team, I go, don't ever blame the competition for you losing. You lost because you either weren't the right fit and you thought you were, or you didn't sell good enough and you didn't ask the right question. So either you need to get the fuck better, or you need to figure out that wasn't a client of yours. That's on you. That's not on the competition. So stop thinking about it that way. And
Johnny, it's funny in the pre-survey. Do you do pre-surveys at all before you do your training? Do you ever do any of those with the?
Sometimes, not anymore, but I used to. Yeah.
There's a great. This is probably a funny thing to end it on. So you mentioned about, hey, here's why you lost, why you didn't. On a pre-survey, I do. It says, about halfway through, it's only like 10 questions, but like question number 4 just says, hey, what's the number reason why you win business? And then I just put a drop down and says, pick one, and it says, and I always put like, it says you/relationship, or that says company, price, product, service, delivery, ready. It was all these things. Sure. And then the next question, I don't even hide it. It says, what's the number one reason why you lose? So it's like, why'd you win? Why'd you lose? Why'd you win? 85 to 90% of the reps, I just hit rep/relationship. Why'd you lose? Bullshit price, wasn't my fault. I love that. They'll take the good, not the bad. So I'm a big believer of that too, and you are too, that there's a reason why your number one reps are pretty much, unless there's a blip on the radar, there's a reason why they're good every year. Yeah. Because they're good at what they do. And even when they go against the competition, they figure out how to, quote, outsell them. So anyway, you and I are so aligned on our thinking on that. So I like that.
Well, look, I genuinely appreciate it. I've been a fan since I got into this space, and I'm still a fan now, and probably even more so because of the perspective I think I have and you do. And so I really appreciate you coming on this and having this conversation. And let's have it again, but let's not have to always do it over a podcast. Let's catch up every once in a while. I appreciate it.
I love you, man. I love to. Yeah, I'd love to come up in your neck of the woods. I love that town.
Yeah, Boston's a fun one. So if you're ever in town, let me know.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well,
thanks Johnny. I appreciate it, man.
Love it. All right, everybody. Look, I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did and got something out of it that hopefully maybe changes your perspective and maybe helps you skip a few steps, but not all of them. Because like John said, we all got to fail to really figure out what success is like. And like I say at the end of all my podcasts here, go out there and make somebody smile today. Because no matter how bad your day is going or you think it is, if you make somebody smile today, you had a good day, and the world needs a lot more of that right now. So thank you all very much, and I'll see you on the other side. Thank you so much for your time today and listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. With your support and our incredible guests, we're one of the top sales podcasts in the industry with over 1 million downloads, and I can't thank you enough. To keep the momentum going, if you could go to your favorite podcast platform and leave us a 5-star review, I would greatly appreciate it. In return, I will answer any question that you have on Instagram. Hit me up there at John M as in Michael Barrows with a video question or a DM, and I will get right back to you, I promise. And last but not least, if you're looking for training, I'm adjusting my training approach this year, and I'm actually going to be delivering training to the masses. I'll be delivering live training the first and second week of every single month with our 2 marquee courses, Filling the Funnel and Driving to Close, to anybody who wants to join. And it includes membership in our on-demand platform with weekly AMAs. So you can go to jbarrows.com/open to check out the details. Thanks again, and have a great day.